Well, welcome back to the Church Society podcast. I'm joined this week by Robbie. Say hello, Amanda.
Hello, everyone.
It's been really great to see people watching and listening over the last couple of weeks. I keep forgetting to say, but I'm going to remember to say it this week. If you're watching on YouTube, do make sure that you are subscribed to our channel. And also you might want to click on the little bell next to the subscribe box to make sure you get a notification every time we upload a new video. You can see all the podcast videos on the podcast playlist, but you also might want to check out some of our other playlists and videos as well. Great. So, Amanda, we've got various things that are sort of going on at the moment, some of which are coronavirus related, but not all of them, which is nice, I think. And we're going to start with something that is only tangentially related to that, but it is something that I have just noticed has been sort of around in the sort of conversation in the last few months, perhaps more than normal, and that is the subject of abortion. So a few months ago, that wonderful lady Heidi Krause, who has Down syndrome, launched her campaign to sue the government against their discriminatory policy on abortion, late-term abortion of people with disabilities. More recently, when we went into lockdown, one of the first things the government announced was that they were relaxing the laws around home abortion. So you can get medical abortion pills. You used to have to go to a doctor and be prescribed, but now you can get them sent to your home and take them at home. It is a subject that obviously Christians have been concerned about. Is it something that is sort of taught on in your church? Is it something that you have thought about much? Is it something that you feel we should be engaging in more as Christians?
Yeah, I don't think it's. I've heard it mentioned as an illustration in passing in a sermon as a sort of a pickup of something that's been in the passage, but I haven't heard any really more detailed teaching since I was a student, I think. And I think it's a subject that certainly young people who are trying to work out their ethical framework discuss. And so I know I've had a discussion with my daughter about it, and my teenage boys have also open to discussing the ethics of abortion. But yeah, not something we've had any sort of major teaching in on our church. We don't have anyone who's sort of majorly passionate about helping people with abortions, although I suspect in our area there's probably quite a high level. The sort of whole teenage pregnancy thing has gone away, hasn't it? So now it's just people get quick abortions, and so you don't see those effects in the same way. I think it's not as up there in people's minds because that we're not seeing lots of teenagers getting pregnant, so that we're not thinking that they're actually getting pregnant and losing the babies.
Exactly. It's not that they're not getting pregnant. Teenage pregnancy is still a big problem, but it's so much easier for people to access the morning after pill or even later abortions. And so, as you say, it's very hidden in our society these days in a way that perhaps even 20 or 30 years ago was much less the case. And I think that slightly worries me when you say, you thought about it more as a student, you've talked with your teenage children about it at that sort of ethical level. But actually, this isn't just a sort of theoretical subject for ethical dilemmas. It is a real life subject, not just for obviously women who get pregnant, but also for those children who are dying as a result of this. And I agree with you. My experience is similar. I think I don't remember hearing a lot of teaching in church about it, except perhaps as an occasional application of something. But it is such a real and serious thing that I just feel maybe we are letting people in our churches down by not addressing it more and more openly. I wonder, for example, whether our churches are always places where people who have had abortions would feel able to admit that and deal with that, or whether they're places where people who feel guilty about having abortions hold on to that guilt and never are able to deal with it, or or think it's somehow are left to think it's fine.
Maybe one of the problems of not addressing it is dealing with is ministry to those who have been impacted by it themselves. Not so much. I think of our congregation, and there's almost nobody I could think of who would be likely to have an abortion because of the age demographic and the sort of
life situation.
Life situation, yeah. But there may well be people who are carrying some guilt or shame or pain about it, which we maybe aren't ministering to. Although maybe those conversations are going on much more privately rather than being addressed in a public way. So that's
true. That is true. I think my feeling is often for these very difficult subjects, in order for people to feel comfortable addressing them privately, it can be really helpful to have some acknowledgement of them publicly as well, and for people to feel able to do that. I wonder though whether there's something more than just the kind of ministering to the individuals in our congregation, which is a thing I think we need to be doing more. Whether as Christians in this country, we've sort of given up on any kind of political activism around this, any attempt to try and change the rules. And, so for example, the thing around the home abortion, it seems to me extremely likely that even when we're out of lockdown, even when things have gone back to normal, that will just continue now.
As a medical procedure, and it's all been fine, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that it just has become such an accepted part of society. And also there's a sort of, it's quite interesting talking to my daughter, students, there's very much, obviously I won't do that, but I don't want to impose that on other people. So there's that sort of liberal, if you like, the political liberals would say that, you do what's right for you, but I'm not going to impose my views on other people. And I think that there's quite a lot of that in our society, that we won't, the sort of the rhetoric of tolerance and so on, is that obviously I would never have an abortion, but if you want to, that's your choice. So,
yes, and I think that's very worrying, isn't it? I think that sort of rhetoric around, for example, sexuality is one thing, but the problem with abortion, obviously, is that there is the unborn child who never gets a voice in that. And actually, that is the role of the state, is to protect the vulnerable who don't have a voice. And that certainly to me feels like a very different kind of argument when you remember there's a third person.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen Catholic commentators being quite outspoken about it, and it's often Catholic groups, Roman Catholic groups, who have run the protests at abortion clinics or whatever. But often the discourse gets so unpleasant that then there's a sort of disinclination to be involved. So it's really tricky, isn't it, to make sure that we're speaking up for the unborn, but not thereby demonizing those who've made that difficult choice. Because no woman goes for an abortion like it's a great thing to do. It's a massive mistake, and there is always going to be some sort of, there's an ethical dilemma for her. So how do we care holistically? I know some churches do have abortion ministries. I know Dundonald, isn't it, in South London, have had a counselling centre.
Yes,
you need someone passionate to set them up, and I think there was one locally in Stoke-on-Trent there were proposals for. So
that sort of actual counselling, but also being willing to really get your church stuck in and say, do you know what, you feel like you don't have an alternative, let's show you how we can help you, so that there feels like there is an alternative. And not just for the next 6 months, but for the next 20 years, we'll walk alongside you and help you raise this child and do those things. Well, I think it is an important subject. I want to commend you, and we'll put a link to this in the description below, the Brefos conference, which happened online a week or two ago, with amongst others Glenn Scrivener and Vaughan Roberts and various people speaking at that. And just, I haven't watched all of it, but what I have seen of that, there's some really helpful advice, and also just some really moving testimony of people who've been through this in different ways. So I do think that's a thing I want to commend to you, and maybe to people in your churches, to just think about, actually, is there more that we could be doing to care for women, to help them care for their children, and to be active in somehow trying to change the political discourse on this subject, because it's people's lives, and we should care about that, perhaps more than we sometimes remember to. Well, speaking of life and death, that is the subject that is all around us one way or another. Last week the Church of England launched a phone line. I think it's called Daily Hope, and it is a phone line for prayers, hymns and words of hope and comfort, and it just made me think, what is the message that as a church we want to be giving people at the moment? People are very scared, a lot of them, very anxious, many already grieving, and so on. Do we want to give people a message of hope and comfort, Amanda? What do we want to be saying to the world out there?
Well, yes, of course we want to give them hope and comfort, but we want to give them the hope and comfort of the gospel, which is not the same as a nice rainbow and Clarke for the NHS, is it? It is. It's not the sort of one day things will all be better sort of hope without any reason for that being true. So as Christians, we know one day everything will be better when the Lord comes again, when we're taken up to glory, when we're in Revelation 21. But as the secular, we want to make sure that people understand that there's more to hope than just everything will be better there.
Yes, and that great hope that we do have isn't a dead cert for everyone, no matter what. And I think that's one of the things I think that churches are struggling with, and that slightly makes me anxious about this phone line. Not that I think it's a bad thing to do, but it's so difficult when you have no idea who you are speaking to and what their situation is, to make sure that you're presenting a message that is right and appropriate to them. So even for Christians, that's quite hard, because we don't really know where everybody's at the moment, and who needs encouragement, and who needs comforting and reassurance, and who needs spurring on. But when you've got somebody who you don't know at all, and who doesn't know the Lord at all, to know what words to speak into that situation is really hard, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, the sort of online services that everyone is doing. You are, when Neil's preaching, he is preaching to our congregation and thinking of them, and not of maybe extra onlookers. And obviously lots of people are quite excited. We are getting people viewing in from elsewhere. I think was it 1 in 5?
Something like that. I saw a statistic. They reckon 1 in 5 of those who've been attending some kind of online service never go to church normally. So, I mean, that's huge. If we suddenly had, 20 extra people out of every 100 turn up on Sunday who were new, we'd be amazed and delighted.
It would be wonderful. But because you don't know them, it's much harder to speak into their situation. So there's a real sort of... I know some people have sort of changed their preaching programs because of the virus, but I've seen an awful lot of people are just ploughing on with what they planned already, because people need to hear the same gospel. It's only the gospel that changes us. It's only the gospel that makes a difference, and we just need to hear that, and we need to hear God's word expounded and taught and preached to our hearts, so that we can follow Christ. And whether people are looking in or are always in church, they still need to hear the same thing. And the danger is that we would want to sort of give people some sort of fluffy gospel to make them feel better. We want people to feel better, don't we?
Yeah.
But actually that doesn't make you feel better in the end if it's not rooted.
Yeah, that's right. I think I was interested that they've set this up as a phone line, because, as you say, many of us are doing online church these days, and there's a lot of advantages to doing online church. But obviously not everybody is online. And I just wondered, where I've seen churches setting up this kind of phone line service, it's mostly been, you can ring up and listen to the sermon from Sunday. And you know, that's a great thing to do, particularly for people in your congregation who can't access it online. Here's a way that they can get some of that. But I wondered if there were other creative ways we could think about using those kind of phone line services.
Well, I think in the longer term, you know, now we've all got our heads around all this technology, there is going to be a lot of ways that we could think creatively. And I think certainly the local phone numbers for local information. So, you know, a little information about what's on at church this week, things about reflections on a local situation, that people could do a sort of more of a thought for the day rather than a sermon. There's lots of options there. If those phone lines do sort of start getting used a bit, it's hard to know. The thing is, it's hard to know how effective they are, and you know, whether they're worth the hassle of all the time spent doing them. And you know, we've had a phone line, but I'm not sure, we've not really got to grips with using it. So if you're a small church with not many resources, you have to marshal them well. And
yeah, absolutely, it's not going to be the top priority for every church to be doing, but I wonder, there might be some churches that do have more capacity, or you know, somebody who's really got time on their hands for this sort of technology. And I did wonder whether there was a real evangelistic opportunity there, something that isn't just aimed at your church, but actually is aimed at your community. And you know, here's a number to phone, you know, if you're in, you know, this area, if you're in this town. And as you say, it could be much more personalized. It could be reflecting on local things, could be some news of local events, but also that sort of, you know, here's a prayer that I'm going to say, here's a Bible reading, here's a little thought.
Yes. When Neil, we first set it up, I think the first thing he had on there was a prayer about the current situation, because everyone was like, just, you know, everyone's heads were completely all over the place, and he thought that would be what would be helpful for people, is to listen to a prayer. So yes, I'm sure there's options there to have, you know, and the one we have has a sort of little menu, so you could sort of, you know, dial 1 for local news, 2 for a prayer, 3 for a hymn, 4 for a sermon, you know.
Or, you know, 5 if what you need is to be put in touch with someone who can.
Or 5 for details of counselling. Options, there's quite a lot of these new things that we've learned about, which is proving could be very useful in the long run. I
think that's right. And I think as we're all sort of starting to realize that this is going to be long term in some form or other, you know, some of these things may need to develop in different ways.
Absolutely.
Well, as we are still in lockdown, one of the things for some people that is meaning is more time with their family, more time with their children. And so I just thought it might be useful to just think for a few minutes about what that means in terms of your children's spiritual well-being. So your children obviously are not at Sunday school anymore, they won't be going to youth group. Maybe your church is providing some online resources for your children, young people, but actually as parents are having to take responsibility for that. And I think we think probably they ought to be taking responsibility for that anyway, but many may have found it easy to you know, entrust that to delegate that to the church, but right now that's not possible. How is that going in your family, Amanda?
Well, we are very blessed that our excellent family and communities worker is running an online Zoom for our very tiny youth group. Yesterday, one of my sons ran through the kitchen shouting that he needed a spatula because they were doing an online scavenger hunt. And then disappeared, also carrying his pull-up bar. So anyway, they've been having lots of fun and really benefiting from that, and studying, you know, 1 Timothy. So, you know, she works them hard. But, you know, obviously, we've been talking to them about their devotional lives, because, you know, their routine has gone. So we're trying to encourage them to find new ways, maybe, of accessing things. Their dad is doing an online morning prayer, and you know, they could watch a video of their dad doing that. They've been watching the service with us. But yes, it is time to sort of check up and check in, I guess, to how people's devotional lives, all of us, you know, our routines are shot and our devotional lives are a bit all over the place. Sorry, here comes the dog.
Good morning, Theo. And so obviously, your children are a bit older now, and at different times, you've had different routines with family devotions. What advice might you have for somebody who is in that situation of suddenly realizing for the first time that actually they are responsible for this and wanting to do the right thing, wanting to help their children spend time with the Lord and do that together as a family? What advice do you have?
There are different stages. So, when they're little, you put them to bed and you read them a story, and we would always read the Bible story at that stage. So, if you've not made a habit of doing that, that could be something you introduce. Just get a children's Bible and read a Bible story and do a little prayer. That's not a difficult thing to do, I'm sure.
And you used to always do this. I remember putting your children to bed, sing them a hymn.
We did, yes, we did.
There
are several hymns. We went for a hymn rather than a sweet little song because we thought they would, just learn that off by heart. So there are a couple of quite large songs that I learnt by heart, and my children therefore learnt by heart. In Christ Alone was one of the favourites that we did. So so there's you can say a blessing over them. One of the things that we used to give out at church was something that Desiring God did, which was a father's blessings for his children, recognizing that quite often it's the mums who do the bedtimes, and just encouraging the dads. But you could go through the New Testament and or the whole of the Bible and pick out a few Bible blessings and then say them over your children at bedtime. Again, those are just little things that would put that routine of God's word in their lives.
And that's something that would be great to do. I mean, great to do now, but actually, that's an ongoing routine for as long as your children are young enough that you're putting them to bed, isn't it? That's
absolutely. You would pray a blessing over them as they go to sleep. So, that's something. Now that my kids are a bit older, we do pray together. We're not a very routine family, so we don't have a sort of strict rhythm. And since lockdown, I've also had horrible toothache, so all family rhythm has gone completely to pot. But we have met together to pray together. But there are actually, I have got there are loads of resources. 10 of those will sell you anything that takes your fancy. But there are 3 things that I have found which have served us well from the ages of 7, and I would still not use now that even that my daughter's 18, that still work well. This is just this is nothing really. It's called Devotional Dippers. It's done by 10 of those, and you go in. It's quite fun, and you get a little. I'm
just going to describe this for people listening to the audio version. I feel very
it's a little stick you pick out of a pot, and it gives you a word: mercy, forgiveness for those who don't deserve it. Read Luke 6. Think, what does being merciful look like? Pray. So it's just a little. But the fun is that you pick out the dipper, and it's random. So there's a sort of fun in that. The other books that we have used regularly is Thoughts to Make Your Heart Sing by Sally Lloyd-Jones. Beautiful illustrations, but also beautiful, quite not obvious thoughts. So even for older teenagers, if you want to grab something, everyone's been grumpy, and you want a thought, it's beautiful and something just a little bit off, not a sort of standard Bible story. The other one that we've used, but I don't think this is in print anymore. So Jonathan Carswell, if you're watching, Step by Step by John Edison is just a daily mixed Bible reading used for donkey's years by lots of different people with a few thoughts, depending how long people are prepared to read for. This is basically, you have to gauge the attention span. And I think what we found is, because we're not routine people, we're not good at sticking with a sort of standard routine, but when we can grab a moment, we grab a moment with the whole family, but also encourage the individuals, older individuals, to study for themselves and to talk about things as well. So there's also not just a sort of a personal devotional time, but also discussing things as they come up on the TV, or as they've had a chat with friends at school, or tomorrow night, Rebecca McLaughlin is doing a discussion with Glenn Scrivener. No, not with Glenn Scrivener. She's doing evangelistic things.
Pete Williams, isn't it? I think.
Is it? Oh yeah, that's right. With Pete Williams from Tyndale House. online discussion about the reliability of the New Testament, those sort of things. And our youngest is quite interested in apologetics, so we're going to try and sit down and watch that as a family on Instagram. I'm not quite sure how we'll project that, but
and I think it's really great, actually. I like that the stuff that you've recommended is stuff that you've been using for years.
Yes.
There is some really great stuff that people are producing online right now. So Faith in Kids, I know, are doing some things, and I'm sure there are others as well. People are doing school assembly type stuff and other videos. And that's great. And I would encourage parents to make use of those. But I think it would be better if what people were able to do is build something up now that can become a routine that lasts much longer.
Yeah, so a routine doesn't mean every day for a year. It might be twice a week for 5 years.
Yeah, you know, but it's something you feel that you could do without having somebody else producing a special resource, and that then you're in charge of that, and you can say, actually, let's grab the book or the dipper or whatever, and we'll do a devotion whenever and wherever that is. And I think that would be a really valuable.
And I think there's something as well. I mean, we've got 3 things here, and actually, if there's a little bit of choice, not a huge choice, again, that helps your slightly grumpy 10-year-old.
Yeah.
To say, okay, which one do you want to do? And you pick it, and so you have some flexibility. You don't feel that it's always nice to complete something, isn't it? But it's also that actually teaching some Bible is better than teaching no Bible, because you've had an argument about using that particular book. So it's that sort of flexibility and thinking every bit of scripture that comes from every word that comes from the mouth of God does not return empty, and that, to remember that.
Yes, and I also wonder, I don't know whether this is true of your family at all or not at the moment, Amanda, but if people's families are struggling a little bit to all love each other all the time during lockdown, I would say there is nothing better for that than having to pray together. Just, it may be really hard, and people different personalities and all cooped up and all of those kind of things, but actually, if you can manage to say a prayer together, it does diffuse quite a lot of that.
And to pray for something outside the family as well, so not just praying for one another, but there's a little girl in our kids club who had to have an operation this week, and so we were able to pray for her together, and there was more urgency to pray from the boys who lead the kids club than there are for other sort of random things. So
that's nice. Great. Well, just as we finish, I know we've recommended a few things there, but I'm just going to ask you, Amanda, to share 1 or 2 things that you found encouraging or interesting over the last few weeks.
Yeah. So, well, I actually picked a couple of things that last couple of days really.
Great.
I'm sure lots of you have already seen the UK Blessing, the song that's gone out online with singers from so many different churches in the UK. There was a real encouragement to me to see all those faces, particularly how multicultural it was. And I think it's a really good thing to share online. And also this morning, I saw a brand new song from Colin Buchanan, that favourite of kids Christian music, who's done a lovely little song on Psalm 139. So it's more adult, but also teach your children that God cares for them from the womb. So as you know, it's a real thing. If you are thinking about the issue of abortion, actually that's a beautiful song to be reflecting on. Yeah. And talking of abortion, we've been watching quite a lot of Silent Witness. There's like more than 100 episodes online on iPlayer at the moment. And last night's episode was there was a sort of incident where Harry, the forensic pathologist, met a young man who he thought might be his child after his student girlfriend, he'd asked her to get an abortion. So there's just a little interesting ethical dilemma there, which, might generate a conversation with teenagers, but also was interesting for us to reflect on. So I recommend Silent Witness for some good detective sort of drama, but also some interesting reflections on society on occasion, not always.
Great, good. And I'm going to recommend a book that actually I read a couple of months ago, but I was reminded of it last week because somebody has written a review of it for our journal, and that is Unexceptional by Sharon I would say it's Sharon Dirksen, that's her name. Dickens, that's right, I'm thinking different person. Sharon Dickens from 20 Schemes. And it is a book about women's ministry, but it is a book about women's ministry like I've never read before, really. It's 8 or 9 women in different places with very different kind of backgrounds, some of them talking about how they came to faith, but then all of them talking about how they minister to women by sharing their lives. That's really the big thing. It's not about going and getting trained up at Bible college. It's not about being having particular teaching gifts necessarily, but actually sharing lives, building community, reaching out. I was so encouraged by it, and I think it's a wonderful vision for what women's ministry can look like. But I think it's also a wonderful vision of what a church should be like. And so I commend it to you, whether you are male or female, to think about how your church could be doing that sort of every member ministry better. So good. Well, I'll put links to all of those in what I like to call the program notes, but really is just the blog post. And I will be back next week. Do you remember to subscribe? Do you remember to click the notification bell? And do you share the podcast with your friends, people at church, anyone who you think might be interested? Thanks so much, Amanda.
All right.
See you next time.
Bye.